Welcome to today's edition of the Rush 24/7 podcast.
Yes, America's Anchorman is away, and this is your EIB dreamer, Mark Stein. Honored to be here. I was brought here through no fault of my own and dropped off in front of the golden EIB microphone by my criminal parents, who gave me the fake social security number of a genuinely all-American Rush guest host. So, tough on him, but don't worry about the guy. He's doing the night shift on WZZZ AM in Dead Possum Junction, wondering what happened. But I'm here doing my one-man dream act for the next 3 hours on America's #1 radio show. Rush is away at a family funeral today, and we send him and the family all our sympathies. It's all starting round about now, I think. So Rush isn't going to be paying any attention to the news today, and that's as it should be, because no matter how long-lived a beloved family member is, it's always a shock. These are the people who were part of your earliest memories, your first Christmases and your first birthdays. So Rush is just one of the family today, and he doesn't care about Lisa Murkowski or Paul Manafort or any of that stuff, but he's going to be back on top of it all Monday with a week of authentic, full-strength, all-American excellence in broadcasting. I'm here in New York with Mr. Snerdley behind the glass. He's the last time I was here, Mr. Snerdley was distracted by Hurricane Irma, and now we have Hurricane Maria, which is just total Puerto Rico, and I think is the last time I was here talking about my poor old fellow subjects of Her Majesty and the Turks and Caicos, because I love Grand Turk, and it was being clobbered by Hurricane Irma then, and it's just about to be clobbered by Hurricane Maria around about now. So we might do a bit. I like the hurricane coverage thing. So we might do. I enjoyed doing the hurricane coverage last time. So we might do a bit of storm tracking today. It's like, well, I might visit the islands. I'd be happy to do. Well, one thing I think actually is quite cool, Mr. Snerdley, is these guys. You see them on the financial channels, the pundits on the financial channels. And you think they're coming from, New York or Chicago or somewhere. Half of them are actually coming from their tax exiles. They're coming from Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. So I think it would be quite cool to actually do the show live from Grand Turk. I might do that next. Instead, I'm here in New York with Mr. Snerdley. And it's General Assembly Week, which is UN General Assembly Week, which is the worst week to be in. I hate being in New York City. It's so embarrassing. You can't get your usual hotel suite, so you're in some dump with all the Z-list dictators. You can't have, it's terrible with women. You meet some chick in a bar and you say, hey, do you want to, you can't say, hey, do you want to come back to my suite at the Plaza or my suite at the Carlisle, because I've got the room next to Kim Jong-un and he's like in the piano bar now doing his Little Mermaid medley, and instead you're like, you're in the Econo Lodge around the back of the freight yards with some Sudanese food taster who's in the 23rd car in the motorcade. It's embarrassing. I was hoping, I switched on the President Erdogan from Turkey. Who doesn't like him? I switched on the TV and they were engaging in their traditional Turkish ritual of beating the crap out of everyone who says something bad about President Erdogan, right here in the heart of New York. And I think I would love to be, wouldn't you like to be in the Palm Court of the Plaza, or wherever President Erdogan is staying, and somebody comes in and he's mad at the waiter because he ordered the eggs Benedict and instead they put the spinach on it, and so his security guys are tossing the busboys all around the ornamental fountain, and instead, no, I mean, it's just so embarrassing. I realize I'm just in this dump of a hotel. I realized I was going up in the elevator. I was with the deputy tourism minister from Chad. That's how bad it is. I mean, I'm furious with EIB. It's just the worst week to be in New York. Anyway, it's General Assembly Week. UN General Assembly Week in New York. And I got to say, I thought Trump's UN speech was terrific. I say that as a Canadian, by the way, and so if you want to know what my guy did, Justin Trudeau did this 40-minute apology for the way Canada has treated its indigenous people. Canada is apparently one of the worst places on the planet. I didn't know that. I thought it was Sudan. And it's not at all. Apparently it's Canada. So that's what my guy was doing. Complete waste of time. And I thought Trump's speech at the UN was a cracker. And actually not just for Americans, because he was absolutely right when he said that sovereignty, it's not just about America first. He wants Americans to put America first. He wants Swedes to put Sweden first. He wants Uzbeks to put Uzbekistan first. And he thinks the world will work much better if we do that rather than pretending there is some kind of international good that exists independently of sovereign nations' national interest. And so that message was not just for America, that was a message for the world, and he's absolutely right about that. So we will take that up, and we will take up all the other big issues in the hours ahead, but it is the end of the week, and you know what that means.
Live from New York City, it's Open Line Friday!
Yes! It is 1-800-282-2882. The phone number is the same, but everything else is different. From Monday, we actually, if there are any UN ambassadors listening out there, we would love to hear from you. Any dictators in town? 1-800-282-2882. It's our dictator hotline. We wonder, anyone, if the official Tunisian government anal examiner is out there, Mehdi Ben Garbia. I thought, for some reason, I thought it was Mehdi Bendover, but it's Mehdi Ben Garbia, the Tunisian anal examiner. If you're listening, give us a call, Mehdi. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800. Everybody's in town. It's like a party time. You don't have to go to Tunisia for your anal examinations. Now they're doing it on Fifth Avenue. Everybody's in town. 1-800-282-2882 is the number to call. And we would love to hear from any of the guys in town from the UN General Assembly. But you know how this works. Like Monday to Thursday, the show is under the control of a ruthless dictator, the Kim Jong-un of radio hosts. He will brook no dissent. He will treat his callers as badly as Kim Jong-un treats his uncles if you get out of line. But on Fridays, the whole thing goes to pieces, and we are like Mitch McConnell trying to whip his caucus into line. The whole place goes to pieces, and you can get away with anything. You can get away with just wandering off into any topics you want to talk about. I mentioned this story, a big story today about anal examinations in Tunisia. I was planning to devote the first 2 hours to it, but if you want to talk about something else instead, you just go for it. 1-800-282-2882. We will talk about anything you want, because Monday to Thursday, as I said, it's like Kim Jong-un around here. The host is like President Erdogan. You just look at him slightly the wrong way, and he will just have his security team pound the hell out of you, and you're off the air. But on Fridays, we do things the Mitch McConnell way. It's all kind of ineffectual dithering. There's no shape or purpose to any of it. You can just be like a Republican senator and just totally derail the whole thrust of where the show's going. 1-800-282-2882. Talk about anything you want to talk about. One thing I would like to say something about this. It's astonishing to me what's happening in Puerto Rico, which has just got totaled by Hurricane Maria. This is supposed to be part of the United States of America. It's a territory. Puerto Rico is $74 billion in debt. And I don't even know how do you get to that with 3 million people? That's like, what is that? That works out at about 25 grand per inhabitant, something like that. That's $74 billion in debt on one tiny little territory with 3 million people. And as we now see from what Hurricane Maria has done, it has completely absurd. The infrastructure, the electric grid was outmoded and dangerous and unreliable before the hurricane hit. Now they're talking about how it could be out of power for 6 months. And incidentally, you think that, whatever it was, I said, 25 grand per person, per capita debt in Puerto Rico. That's actually a lot less than the United States as a whole. Because I think the per capita debt in the United States is about $60,000 per person. But that's mainly because of this huge amount of federal debt. This $74 billion in Puerto Rico, that one territory has managed to run that thing up, which is why it's gone through this form of pseudo-bankruptcy. So if you have actually any ideas on what should be done, there's a sovereign part of the United States that they're talking about. Rush said the other day, don't believe all this stuff. They're not going to be out of power for 6 months. They're going to get this thing up and going in a much quicker time than that. And he might be right. But if you've got any ideas about what could be done to right Puerto Rico in a permanent way, I'd be interested to hear from them. 1-800-282-2882, Mark Stein for Rush, open line Friday, anything, we're like the United Nations General Assembly. You can talk about, you are like the dictators of Sudan and North Korea. You can talk about anything you want to talk about today. 1-800-282-2882. Mark Stein in for Rush on America's #1 radio show, Open Line Friday. Rush was talking about this early in the week, but I want to underline the point because it is amazing to me, and it is amazing to me that more people are not angry about it, because the implications of it are extraordinary. It's the biggest, absolutely the biggest story out there. We have had for months now this so-called Russia investigation. And the pretext for the Russia investigation is that there was foreign interference in America's election. And perhaps there was and perhaps there wasn't. Countries interfere in other countries' elections all the time, using whatever levers they have to hand to influence what they regard as favourable outcomes in those elections. Obama interfered in the Brexit vote over in London, for example. He stood next to David Cameron on the steps of 10 Downing Street and said that if the United Kingdom left the European Union, it would have to go to the back of the line for any trade deals. And that was nonsense, but Obama felt no compunction about interfering in the domestic affairs of the United Kingdom. But, in fact, we still do not know whether there was any actual Russian interference or any other foreign interference in the American election. What we do know is that there was extraordinary domestic interference in America's election, to the point where it's all totally wrecked now. We don't actually, we were in the extraordinary situation where the National Policing Agency, the FBI, and the Department of Justice was monkeying around in both campaigns for almost the entirety of the presidential election. On the one hand, it was soft-peddling the Hillary thing, and on the other, it was using the surveillance powers of the state to get the goods on its political opposition. Now, let's just break that down. I was making jokes about the UN dictators who are all over town now, and they seem very nice chaps when you run into them around New York City, because they're all dressed up with their bespoke tailoring. They've generally left the machetes back in whatever third world hellhole they come from, and they're trying to behave like civilized people. And one reason they feel more at home in the United States than they should is because Barack Obama, for the last year and a half of his presidency, was basically running a banana republic operation. We have the ruling party using the permanent bureaucracy to get the goods on its political opposition. That's all that the Russia investigation is. There are no Russians in the Russia investigation. And you take any aspect of it that caught their fancy. For a start, the FBI eavesdropping on Paul Manafort since 2014, right? They've basically been surveilling him constantly for 3 years or so. They haven't got the goods on him. They haven't convicted him of anything. They haven't charged him with anything, but they've just been eavesdropping on him. That stinks. That shouldn't be going on just right there. But then you look at what else they've been doing. For example, there was this prince from the United Arab Emirates, the Crown Prince, Crown Prince, because they've got a big bunch of emirates, hence the name. And he came to town, and Obama didn't want to see him. And it was after the election, so he thought he'd see the incoming government. So he arranged a meeting with the Trump campaign guys at Trump Tower. And the Obama administration, the outgoing Obama administration, decides to eavesdrop on that. Why? The United Arab Emirates isn't an enemy. It's supposedly an ally of the United States. It's an ally of the United States. So this no-name prince from the Emirates, a person who is of no interest to Obama, the national security apparatus of the United States government is being deployed to eavesdrop on this conversation, not because the prince is a figure of interest, but because they want to hear what the Trump guys he's talking to are saying. So this is the point here. The whole national security thing is a pretext to surveil your political opponents. Now, does that sound like a free society, or does that sound like Banana Republic territory? Americans should be hopping mad about this. The FISA court is a rubber stamp, for a start, and so-called, quote, foreign agents, unquote, can mean any foreigner. Could be a Canadian, right? So if one of you guys wants to, I'm doing I'll be in Minneapolis on October the 2nd. And if you like listening to Rush and you like some of his guest hosts and you come along, FISA could, under that pretext of you meeting with a Canadian, the United States government could eavesdrop on you. This prince is of no interest to anybody. The only reason they're eavesdropping on that conversation is because their political opposition are in the room with him. And that's the only interference that is going on in this Russia investigation. It's nothing to do with foreign interference in a U.S. election. That goes up. Foreign countries are entitled to use what powers they can to influence other countries' elections as they see fit. That goes on all the time. China is monkeying around with all kinds of cyber breaches all the time. And if we catch them, we throw the book at them, or we should throw the book at them. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is domestic interference to delegitimize the winner of the 2016 election. And after he won, and he took them all by surprise, so around about 10 p.m. on that Tuesday night in November, all these guys suddenly start eavesdropping, because they're trying to cripple the Trump presidency from the word go. And they're doing it up to noon on January the 20th. Domestic interference in U.S. elections, not foreign. Yeah, it's Open Line Friday, 1-800-282-2882 on America's #1 radio show. There's all kinds of important stories we should be talking about. Richard Simmons has lost his lawsuit against the National Enquirer and been ordered to pay their costs. He's out about the best part of $1 million. Because he sued them after they published a front page story. You know this guy, Richard Simmons? He's like the fitness guru. He's in the videos with the leotard and all the rest of it. And he appeared on the front page of the National Enquirer, and they said he was transitioning into a woman, and that he had grown breasts and had his and had actually had the old wedding tackle removed. So they've said that Richard Simmons is transitioning into a woman. And he's got breasts, and he's had the other bits taken away. And he sues the National Enquirer, and the judge tosses the case out and orders him to pay the National Enquirer's legal bills on the grounds that it's not defamatory to say you're transitioning. It's not defamatory to say you're a transgender woman these days. So it's actually a huge compliment. What is Richard Simmons complaining about? He should be flattered that he's on the front page of the magazine at every supermarket checkout saying he's grown breasts and had his private parts removed. And so the judge says, how can that possibly be defamatory? It's actually a huge compliment. Who wouldn't want to be transitioning into a woman? So just so we know where we stand now, this is legal precedent. It'll be upheld by Anthony Kennedy at the Supreme Court any day. Anthony Kennedy, don't you think he seems, do you think he's growing breasts? He seems like he's transitioning into a woman to me. Don't you think so? I don't mean it. Of course I'm not disparaging him. It's a huge compliment. Wouldn't you like to have Antonia Kennedy as the deciding vote on the Supreme Court? Wouldn't it be a great thing for America to have the first transition Supreme Court justice up there deciding everything instead of this white male? Who wouldn't want to transition? This is what an American judge is ruling in the year 2017. It's not defamatory for a newspaper or a magazine to publish something saying you've grown breasts and have had your male genitals removed, because in the America of 2017, that's not a slur. That's a fabulous Do you know Jimmy Carter? I saw a picture of Jimmy Carter the other day. I think he's growing breasts and becoming a woman. I mean, it's a compliment, Jimmy. You look fabulous. You look I thought you were terrible as a man. What a wimp. Everyone was, the Ayatollah was kicking you in the sand, but you make a fabulous woman, Jimmy. So there's not that's the state of American jurisprudence in the year 2017. It's a compliment for newspapers to publish fake stories about you saying you've grown breasts. American jurisprudence in the year 2017. What do you do to get away from this kind of stuff? To get away from the madness? To try and find an ocean of sanity in the derangement of officialdom in the United States. All you have to do is go to rushlimbaugh.com and become a Rush 24/7 subscriber, and it means what it says. You can live with Rush 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You'll get access to the archive. So you got almost 30 years of terrific radio shows, transcripts. You can get them in audio form. You can get highlights. You can get your favorite moments. You can get the Ditto Cam. And if you subscribe now, but you can subscribe for the full year, which is always recommended because that's like easier. They just take the full years out. Or if you think, I don't know about this, I might want to experiment with it. You can pay as you go. I think it's quarterly or monthly or whatever it is. But there's an advantage if you take out the year's subscription because you get this fabulous tumbler. It's a big 16-ounce Rush tumbler. I'm actually drinking out of it right now if you want to hear a slurp. That's great. It's a great tumbler. Fantastic tumbler. They don't give this to every guest host. You've got to be guest hosting for at least 7 years, I think, before they give you this thing. So if any of the other guest hosts are out there, you got years to go before you get one of these. But I'm drinking out of my Rush tumbler. You can drink out of your Rush tumbler if you take out a year's subscription to Rush 24/7. It keeps your cold drinks cold and your hot drinks hot. So it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter what it is. If you like to drive around in your truck with a great big steaming tumbler full of hot coffee, or you prefer a little like chilled Sauvignon Blanc in there. I don't know. Is it legal to drive around the roads of America with a little chilled Sauvignon Blanc in your... Oh, it probably isn't. What am I talking about? Don't try that at home, boys and girls. But you can get your Rush tumbler just by taking out a year's subscription to Rush 24/7, and that's available at rushlimbaugh.com. I just want to re-emphasize the insanity of what is going on with this so-called Russia investigation. There is no Russia investigation. They have, in fact, they are in fact using Russians. I mean, this would have made a great Cold War thriller in about 1962, because this is like the this is like the Manchurian Candidate squared. They decided to use a so-called Russia investigation as a pretext for domestic interference in the result of a U.S. election. Now, if we go back to the Hillary investigation, the Hillary investigation went nowhere. And the argument for that is that, yes, she broke the law. Everyone agrees she broke the law. And that if you were some low-level guy who broke the law, like that U.S. ambassador in Kenya or Uganda or somewhere in East Africa, he did what Hillary did. He used his personal email for work, and Hillary fired him. And that's fine. The reason there's a difference between how Hillary treats a U.S. ambassador in East Africa and how James Comey treats Hillary is because Hillary is the anointed choice of Democrat voters from Maine to Hawaii. So that the justification for easing up on Hillary and not prosecuting her for breaking the law is that, in effect, the people have spoken. The people want to be represented by Hillary as the Democrat candidate. So you got to soft pedal it, because otherwise politics becomes impossible and you'd be interfering in the election. So James Comey decided, and the Democrats, Loretta Lynch, Obama, it went all the way up, decided they were not going to interfere with the choice of the Democrat electorate in primary season. Instead, they interfered with the choice of the American electorate in November and decided to cripple his presidency by using the all-powerful national security laws of the United States to get the goods on him. And this is, and this strategic leaking. Rush was talking about the CNN story the other day. That suddenly on CNN, they're leaking all these details about picking Paul Manafort's lock and searching. They bust into the house at 6 a.m. You know, they do this. The FBI do this because when they raid like drug gangs at like 10:30 in the morning, the drug gangs see the cars pull up and can open fire on them. They do so they decide to treat Paul Manafort and his wife basically like the scummiest of scummy criminals. And they go there, they pick his lock at 6 a.m, they bust in on Mr. and Mrs. Manafort as they're in bed, and they insist on searching Mrs. Manafort in her nightie, in her negligee, in her silk pajamas or whatever she's wearing, in case she's got an AK-47 hidden in there and she's going to open up on them. And people think this is cute. People think this is cute. It isn't. It isn't. It's actually the sign of a descent into lawlessness, which is one of the defining characteristics of a banana republic. Here we have the permanent bureaucracy out of control, and at the behest of the party that lost the election, crippling the incoming party and preventing it functioning. This is a huge story with huge implications, because it's effectively nullifying the Electoral College result of November the 8th and saying it doesn't matter who you vote for, because you can vote for change, but we're not going to let you have any change. Well, you can vote for change, and we're going to cripple the guy before he comes in. But it's not a story of foreign interference in the U.S. election. It's a story of domestic interference in the U.S. election. And the reason it was leaked on CNN is the same reason that the Lois Lerner stuff was disclosed. They're doing a limited, modified hangout of the story to neutralize its political impact. And you know that worked for them with Lois Lerner. We have a corrupt revenue agency in this country. And the people who were responsible for politicizing tax collection, for politicizing the collection of taxes, the people who were responsible for that have never paid any price for it. And the intention here is that the people who cooked up this phony Russia investigation are not going to pay the price for it either. Mark Stein for Rush. We'll take your calls straight ahead. Open Line Friday on America's #1 radio show. Let us go to Ryan in West Palm Beach, Florida. Post-Irma, West Palm Beach. Great to have you with us, Ryan.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great to be on. I want you to follow me down the rabbit hole here a little bit. I'll try to keep this nice and tight here. But
okay.
So North Korea is a country that kind of has, very little economic output, barely able to sustain its own citizens, let alone a multi-billion-dollar ICBM program. Right. We find out that Ukraine is providing missile technology to these folks. That's weird. Okay, right. They're a UN ally.
Right.
Well, who else are they taking money from? And it got me thinking about, well, we know China, but what about Iran? I mean, if Iran is working on a nuclear program and were to fire an ICBM, Israel would bomb them into oblivion. So maybe our North Korean enemies are potentially even helping out our other enemies, and that's something that I worry about. Wanted to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Ryan. I'll tell you why. I mean, it goes back in a certain sense to what George W. Bush said when he named North Korea as part of the axis of evil in the year 2001. These guys are all in contact with each other. You mentioned the Ukrainian and Iranian connections with North Korea. Just to get one thing out of the way, when you North Korea's entire budget, more or less, is spent on its military. So, in fact, it's easy to develop weapons programs when you're willing to starve everybody and you just spend the budget on the military. So it's not necessarily for that reason. But these countries, these rogue members of the nuclear club, are all in contact with each other. Yeah, so you mentioned Ukraine and Iran. It's also true that Pakistan, for example, Pakistani nuclear scientists have been in contact with the North Korean guys, as they were in contact with the Iranian guys. And it's done at a sort of semi-official level too, because these people, what these regimes have in common is they understand that this is the great equalizer. That if Gaddafi hadn't given up his nuclear program after the fall of Saddam Hussein, he'd still be in power there instead of dying like a dog in the street. That it makes you untouchable. And they don't really care about a lot of this stuff, except that they would like to be untouchable. And I think your idea is actually quite useful here, that you've got in Iran, Pakistan, Ukraine, you've got a more educated and scientific population than you have in North Korea. So you lend scientists to North Korea, and in exchange you get to test stuff there that would otherwise be a little too much in the scrutiny of the world if they were to start testing it in Tehran or whatever. So I think that point is actually quite well taken, Ryan. That's actually not too far down the rabbit hole. You're just like sticking your little bunny snout in there with your bobtail poking up above the ground still. So it's not actually that deep in the rabbit hole. It's actually making a lot of sense, and there is a lot of circumstantial evidence to support it, Ryan.
Thank you for your thoughts. Always a pleasure.
No, thank you, Ryan. And I would say this is just, they have just in the last few days, they've lobbed two things over Japanese territory, in Japanese airspace, as it were. And the Japanese are supposed to be relaxed about this because it hasn't actually come down on Japan, that it went through Japanese airspace and then into the ocean. Would you want to bet on that? Sooner or later, one of these things is going to actually come down on land, and there's going to be somebody underneath it when it comes down. And somehow, it's fascinating to listen to all these lefties who've been moaning about how bellicose Trump was at the United Nations. And that maybe it's that way if you're in Midtown Manhattan. What's the big deal about North Korea going nuclear? What's the big deal? You're in Japan. It's a highly developed society. It's a member of the G7. It's one of the world's biggest economies. And you've got some nut lobbing these things through your airspace on a regular basis. And you're meant to put up with that. Why? This doesn't go anywhere good. Because that's what you're being asked to put up with now. What's the next thing you're going to be asked to put up with? It accidentally comes down on an outlying island, but there was nobody, there was just like a few sheep there, so no people were killed, so what are you making such a fuss about? This story isn't going anywhere good. A world in which basket case states are nuclear and sophisticated global economies can't defend themselves against that. That means the basket cases will inherit the earth. Mark Stein for Rush, lots more still to come. Tunisia has decided it's going to stop forcing suspected homosexuals to undergo anal examinations. This is what they do in Tunisia. Point to bear in mind if you're thinking of just flying into Tunis for a pleasant 2-week beach vacation. Mehdi Ben Garbia, the Minister for Human Rights, has said that starting at some unspecified date in the future, the anal examinations are going to be voluntary. Which sounds good, but of course, if you do volunteer for it, they might take that as a bit of a giveaway. so just a point to bear in mind when you land at Tunis International Airport. Oh, would you? Well, you're welcome to Tunisia. Would you like to have an anal examination? Oh, well, that's I like nothing better at the end of a long flight. What could be better? So Mehdi Ben Garcia, not Mehdi Bend Over, as I called him earlier, the Minister for Human Rights, is cleaning up Tunisia. You can go there safely now if you volunteer. Yes, America's Anchorman is away today, and this is your dreamer, living the dream, a one-man dream act on America's #1 radio show for 3 hours today. Rush is at a family funeral today, and he will be back on Monday, but all the funeral and everything is all going on about now, so he's not focused on the news, not interested in North Korea, not interested in James Comey. He's focusing on what really matters, and spare a thought for him and for Rush and his family at a difficult time. They're all at a family funeral today, but Rush will be back on Monday. In the meantime, this is Mark Stein holding down the fort. I'm honoured to be here. As Rush mentioned the other day, 27 million people listen to this radio show. 27 million, which is an incredible number. I came in on this show the first time I was asked to guest host. I think Mr. Snerdley gave me a call, however many years it is now, I think 11 years ago. And I was actually, the date he asked me to guest host was like a day after I came back to Australia, from Australia. And I was down in Australia with the Prime Minister, the great John Howard, and he asked me to come to an education summit or something he was hosting the following day. And I said, I can't, I got to fly back. I'm hosting the Rush Limbaugh show. And he said, oh, yeah, I hear that's a pretty big show over there. And I said, yeah, it is. It's got like 25 million listeners. And John Howard goes, Struth. He goes, Rush has got more listeners than we have Australians, which is actually kind of incredible. And it's gone up even more, 27 million. 27 million. And I say this as a Canadian. I think Canada's population is about 33, 34 million now. So why don't we see if we can get more Rush listeners than there are Canadians? And that way, you know the way these governors of states always say, well, if my state was a country, it would be the 12th biggest economy in the world. Why don't we see if we can't get the Rush Limbaugh show audience a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council? Because I think once we get them up there in numbers, I think that would be great. And actually it would be great for the world, too. Speaking of the UN, Kim Jong-un has responded to the attack on him by President Trump, and he called, Trump is calling him Rocket Man. One of the few conversations I've had with the president was about the tenants at Trump Tower, and I believe Elton John has a flat, an apartment at Trump Tower, as does Andrew Lloyd Webber, and that is why on campaign rallies, the funny thing about Trump is that at his campaign rallies, he always played unusual music. He had the theme from the Phantom of the Opera. The Phantom of the Opera is here. And then Trump comes out. And then he'd play Tiny Dancer by Elton John. And then Trump would come out. It was very strange music. I said to him backstage, I said, I've figured it out. You just play music by tenants at Trump Tower. And he gave a little smile. He didn't quite confirm it, but he gave a little smile. And I think he's now extended that to the insults he uses for world leaders. So he's calling Kim Jong-un Rocket Man. Because if Elton John's royalties go up a bit, then he's not going to be late with the rent like he's been for the last 4 months or so. So that's good. He's calling Kim Jong-un Rocket Man. Kim Jong-un has responded by calling him a dotard. And that is Mr. Snurdley's looking completely baffled. You're looking. It means someone who's flown the coop mentally. Dotard. No, I know. The CNN had a panel discussion called What is a Dotard? Actually, everyone on the panel was a dotard. The New York Times has said, Kim Jong-un has called Trump a dotard. What does that even mean? It's actually in Shakespeare. It looks like dotard, but some people pronounce it dotard. It's one of those things. It's like some people don't say venison, they say venison. Or they don't say alarm, they say alarum. And there's some people who say dotard and some people who say dotard. And in fact, Susan Wood asked me, she tweeted about how she's sick. People are saying dotard. You know, in the same way that we used to have pecan pie, and then Martha Stewart came along and said pecan pie. So you say potato, you say dotard. That's like Martha Stewart cooking for dotards. And then Shakespeare, he said dotard. You can tell by the prosody in it. I forget what it is. It's in Winter's Tale. Might even be in King Lear. He used it a lot. It's nice to know Kim Jong-un is bringing back these. I like it if you hear Alexander Haig at the time of the Falklands invasion. He was Secretary of State, and he called Lord Carrington, the British Foreign Secretary, a duplicitous bastard. And that wasn't very diplomatic, but I liked it because you didn't hear duplicitous very much. And so I thought it was... And I always, funnily enough, he's such a nice chap, Lord Carrington, and whenever I run into him, I always think of him as a duplicitous bastard, since Alexander Haig called him one. And it's the same with dotard, or dotard. High on the hill was a lonely dotard. You remember that in Sound of Music? It was, what was that, dotard, a big dotard? I can't remember. Anyway, it's all in the Sound of Music, and in Shakespeare. And Kim Jong-un, this is fantastic. It's Rocket Man versus the dotard. And of course, the left has gone even crazier, and they're saying, Why can't we have... Trump's speech was so dark. Hillary Clinton was right. It was such a dark speech. It was so dark and threatening. Why can't we have a reasonable leader like Kim Jong-un? He's so literate. He's using all this Shakespearean language. He's called Trump a dotard. Why couldn't Marco Rubio have done that to him in one of those debates and we wouldn't be in this mess? So dotard, if you're Martha Stewart, is our word of the day. That's the secret word. And if you use the secret word when you call in, we may give you some bonus points and bonus prizes. So we'll try and get to some of that. But it's great to be sitting in on UN General Assembly Day with all these world leaders giving speeches. I'm going to be in Minneapolis. I mentioned this as an aside in the first hour, and someone said, "What do you mean you're going to be in Minneapolis?" I'm going to be at the Guthrie Theatre a week on Monday, October 2nd. For the Center of the American Experiment. And these guys, it's like some of the same guys at the Powerline website that Rush quotes from time to time on the show. They're great guys. And they run the Center of the American Experiment. And I'll be there at the Guthrie Theatre in Minneapolis, Monday, October 2nd. And if you're thinking, well, I don't want to... and you go, it's americanexperiment.org, I think, or if you find that all a bit difficult, you can go to Stein Online, Steyn, and we've got a little link to it there. But if you're thinking, I don't know, Stein, listening to him, it could be, I don't know whether I want to do that, whether I want to go to the Guthrie Theatre. There was a bonus last time. You know, these things that you can have your photograph taken afterwards. The person running the photography line bunked off and went to the men's room or whatever it was for 40 minutes. So Michelle Bachmann, the great Congress woman from Minnesota and my favorite presidential candidate of whatever year that was, Michelle Bachmann was actually taking the photographs and running the photography line. So that's how cool it is. The main act is lousy, but the person who takes the photographs afterwards is great. And you're going to, if Michelle shows up this time, might not be Michelle Bachmann. It might be, I don't know, Louis Gohmert or somebody. Might be Chuck Schumer. You don't know. We just have a lot of these senators and representatives like to moonlight by doing a little bit of event photography in Minneapolis. But it was Michelle Bachmann last time, so if you fancy having your photograph taken with me, you can take or leave that, but it'll be taken by Michelle Bachmann. That happened last time. But I'm going to be in Minnesota there. It is the end of the week, and you know what that means.
Live from New York City, it's Open Line Friday!
We love it. We're not like Monday to Thursday, that tyrannical dictator running the show, demanding you only talk about what he wants to hear as if he's Kim Jong-un, and you're not allowed to wander off topic or he'll just take you out back and shoot you like Kim done with his uncle. We're not like that here. The whole show has gone to pieces. Any gibbering dotard, whether you're a dotard or a dotard, you can call 1-800-282-2882. That's our special dotard line. If you want to talk about Kim Jong-un dismissing Trump as a frightened dog, a whipped dog. He's a whipped dog out there in the dotard corner of the dog pen. You can call up and have your say on that or any other subject you want. As I said, I think the big thing is, which is now obvious, is that senior members of the Obama administration interfered in the U.S. election. You didn't need Putin to interfere with elections from the Kremlin, because the Oval Office was interfering in the election. And you have Samantha Power basically demanding the unmasking of a U.S. person at a rate of 1 per day, all the way up to the transfer of power on January 20th. Now, Samantha Power isn't James Bond. Samantha Power is not an intelligence operative. And what is disturbing about this story is that, in effect, the immense powers of the bloated and excessively large intelligence community. And you may be wondering why they missed, well, for example, we were talking about nukes in the last hour. They missed Pakistan going nuclear. They missed the collapse of the Soviet Union. They miss all the big stuff. They miss Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. They miss all the big stuff. And you occasionally wonder why about that. Well, we've learned in the last few weeks that they're being used. The Obama administration used the pretext of national security to wiretap its political opponents. That's the story. That's the only story. You don't need guest appearances by Vladimir Putin. You don't need any foreigners in this story. It's a tale of domestic interference in the electoral process of the United States of America by one party against its political opponents. Mark Stein for Rush will take your calls straight ahead. Mark Stein in for Rush. Valerie Plame, you may recall, she was the former CIA officer who wound up getting Scooter Libby sent to jail after she was unmasked, as we would now say, by Bob Novak during the Bush years. And unmasking was bad during the Bush years, but unmasking now under the Obama years is great. So anyway, Valerie Plame, former undercover CIA, she wasn't really, again, she's another one who thinks she's James Bond. She's just some bureaucrat. But she's now in trouble for allegedly retweeting this anti-Semitic article, multiple tweets alleging a Jewish conspiracy is behind America's wars. The piece is called America's Jews Are Driving America's Wars. And she was tweeting, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Very interesting stuff in there. At one point, the guy says, when Bill Kristol from the Weekly Standard appears on TV, you should have, it should be rat poison warning, do not ingest when these guys. So eventually she backed down. But it's interesting to me that Valerie Plame, they made a movie. She was blonde. She was good looking. They photographed her for Vanity Fair. They made her this great heroine, this pinup. And then she accidentally gave away on Twitter what she thought. Let's go to Greg in Glasgow, Kentucky. Greg, you are live on America's #1 radio show. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. And great to speak with you. And my condolences to Rush and his family.
No, it's a tough thing. It doesn't matter how old your beloved relative is. They're part of your earliest memories, and it's a tough thing. What's on your mind today, Greg?
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, and this is a subject that's near and dear to Rush's heart. And it's about the NFL, and he, I believe, even just yesterday spoke about the concussion issue with the NFL.
Right. And
my question to you is, I wonder if the game of rugby might have an answer for that, just not wearing any helmets, and what your thoughts would be toward that.
Well, I played rugby for years, and you're right, we don't wear a helmet, and I'm nuts, so I don't know how that works. How that works out. Now, Mr. Surdley is holding up cue cards explaining that NFL stands for National Football League. I think that's right. And this is like all over, you should know, Greg, all over America, there are people who hate it when Rush talks about football. And they're now going, oh my God, it's even worse now. The guest hosts are talking about football. And they're foreign guest hosts, so they don't even know anything about American football. But I will tell you this, Greg. I played second row rugby for years. And if you don't know, second row, you're in the scrum. So you basically got your head between the one guy's right buttock and one guy's left buttock for years of your life. And they're bony guy buttocks. They're not like these pert Tunisian gay buttocks where they've all been doing the bubble butt exercise. They're bony guy buttocks shearing off your brain in the scrum playing rugby without a helmet. I love playing rugby. The last time I played, I'd love to play one really great rugby match before I die. The last time it nearly did kill me. But when I watched the Fijians playing rugby, when I watched the All Blacks down in New Zealand. That's nothing to do with being black. That's just cultural appropriation. New Zealand calls their rugby team the All Blacks because they're all white or they're all Maori. I don't know what they are. Anyway, they're not black, but but they have got great butts. And the South Africans, the Springboks. I love rugby, and I think there is something to that, Greg. And what were you saying, Mr. Snerdley? There, the Springbok. Yeah. Mr. Snerdley can't figure this out, why the white guys are calling themselves the All Blacks. It's not like a minstrel show. It's not way down on the levee in old Alabama. It's not like that. I can't. I've got distracted now. I want to make a point, Greg. You're right. I think, for a start, I will say this, and Rush will never use me again, so this is my last appearance. I don't think sports, you should be wearing protective clothing. So I think you should just do it. Like, we didn't have the shoulder pads in rugby either. We just wore these little rugby shirts, and that, basically, and we got the studded boots, and there's, it's a painful business when you're at the bottom of a scrum, and the hooker, as they call him, is, and now Mr. Snerdley's looking baffled again. It's like, it's not just they got white guys pretending to be black, but they book a hooker too. What kind of sport is this? It sounds like the last sales convention I went to in Vegas. I think you're right, that I think the minute you have the protective clothing, people are not responding as they do to human beings. And also, I like to see the faces. The hockey players. I love hockey. I don't like hockey with helmets, and I much preferred it in the old days when you could see the faces of Monsieur Béliveau and all the other great players at the Montreal Canadiens. So I don't like protective clothing in sports, and I think it does make it more dangerous. Yes, Rush is out today, and he will be back on Monday, but a good way to avoid being discombobulated by sinister foreign guest hosts is to go to rushlimbaugh.com and become a subscriber to the Limbaugh letter. The Limbaugh letter, he had a caller on a couple of days ago who was raving about the Limbaugh letter and was actually showing it to friends and showing the big interviews and good stuff in it. And that guy was right, that the Limbaugh letter is a terrific read, and the centerpiece of it is always Rush talking to some interesting person. He's interviewing in the October issue Matthew Hennessy from the Wall Street Journal, who's the author of Right Here, Right Now, How Generation X Can Save the World from Crybabies, Cupcakes, Driverless Cars, and the Dystopian American Future Being Cooked Up in Silicon Valley. Is that like the world's longest subtitle for a book? I don't know. I'm amazed once you've typed that out that there's any room left for the interview. But Rush is going to interview Matthew Hennessy in the October issue of the Limbaugh letter. And if you subscribe today, you get a 13th issue free. So there are 13 months in the year. Only when you subscribe to the Limbaugh letter. You'll also get Rush's bonus report, 15 Ways to Beat Liberal Lies. You can get it in digital or print. It's whatever tickles your fancy. All you got to do is go to rushlimbaugh.com. You'll see the button there, and you can subscribe to the Limbaugh letter. Sometimes small things are big things. And you'll know this. Because Rush often gets into trouble for a joke, an aside, a passing fancy, a parenthetic subordinate clause that some little plonking twerp at Media Matters picks up, and then everybody else goes bananas over it, and the whole thing goes on for weeks. Mel Brooks, the veteran Hollywood director, has said that today's stupidly politically correct sensibilities will lead to the death of comedy. And specifically, he said that you wouldn't be allowed to make the film Blazing Saddles today, which was his great Western, comedy Western from 1974. And what's interesting to me about that, what Mel Brooks said, is that in a certain sense, Blazing Saddles, if you've seen the film, you'll know it's actually quite politically correct. Like Cleveland Little, the cool black sheriff, is the good guy, and all the racist, redneck, bigoted white townsfolk are the bad guys. So in a certain extent, and Mel Brooks in that sense is a big Hollywood liberal, but he still liked to have a laugh. And so there are a lot of jokes at the expense of black people and white people in that film, regardless. So even though it was like a politically correct film in the sense that the black sheriff is the good guy, everything that those guys are talking about there, you couldn't do just because you can't be honest about certain stereotypes anymore. Stereotypes arise because people see a degree of truth in them. Comedy is about recognition. It's about shared recognition. We laugh at certain things because we recognize them. The comedian has just taken it to the next level. John Cleese from Monty Python, and John Cleese, again, he's a liberal. He used to support the Social Democratic Party in Britain, which were the wimpy party between the Conservatives and the Socialists. And he once sued me, so I got no reason to be a big fan of John Cleese particularly, but he happened to say something that I thought was also interesting the other day, that comedy is about a sense of proportion. So if you don't have comedy, you in a sense, you no longer have a sense of proportion. And I think that actually has a degree of truth in it. I think when you look at the countries that have fallen for totalitarianism, of one kind or another, the countries that have gone for Nazism or fascism or Germany, for example, doesn't have a great reputation as a barrel of laughs, a big stand-up comedy circuit. And it was often said that the one reason that the British, for example, didn't fall for the fascists or the Nazis in the 1930s was they couldn't take seriously a bunch of guys marching around in black shorts in an extremely camp fashion. They just thought it was too funny. And so it's actually when you start to lose a sense of humour, as John Cleese sees it, you are in a certain sense losing a sense of proportion. When you actually now have lives destroyed because you make an inappropriate joke, which is what goes on, eventually there's nothing to become funny about. And eventually you wind up with that ratings bust that they had on the Emmys the other night, where they're doing all the anti-Trump material. And none of it actually approximate. Some of those things had the form of a joke, but they weren't actually funny. I mean, they subscribed to the kind of conventions of a joke, but they didn't actually have any joke in it. And it was bizarre to watch that. Because essentially people are not laughing anymore. They're applauding themselves for having correct attitudes. And this guy, Stephen Colbert, he gave the definitive example on that. Do you remember a couple of months ago when Trump fired Jim Comey? And Stephen Colbert walks out to start his show and he goes, did you hear in the news? He does his opening monologue, topical monologue, and he goes, did you hear that they fired Jim Comey today, the FBI director? And everybody in the audience cheers. And Stephen Colbert has to explain to his audience that you're not meant to cheer the firing of Jim Comey by Trump because Jim Comey is the good guy because he's the guy who's been fired by Trump. And so, in effect, he then does a reprise and he tells the joke again, and this time they don't applaud because they've been told the correct attitude to have to the joke. This is the death of comedy. This is absolutely the death of comedy. And it's one of the most striking features of that Emmy Awards show. People applauding themselves for having the correct attitude. There's no such thing as a great uproarious belly laugh. There's no such thing as just like just genuinely laughing, clutching your sides because somebody said something that was absurd or ridiculous, and it and the quirkiness of it got to you. It's just congratulating yourself for holding the correct attitudes. And Mel Brooks and John Cleese are both right about that. There's something strange about the policing of comedy that's going on. It's a few years ago when I got into trouble with the British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal, and they didn't dare to convict me. I was guilty under their stupid law. Actually, they flew in this Islamic scholar to discourse on the subtext of my jokes for a full day. He was from Philadelphia, this big shot Islamic professor. And he sat on the witness stand and explained the subtext of my Islamo comedy, because it's great. You know, I was like the only one doing Islamic comedy. A couple of other guys tried it, but they'd find their heads round the back of the parking lot a couple of days later. So there wasn't a lot of, so they flew in this big Islamic scholar to discourse on my, and after the British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal acquitted us because they didn't have the guts to convict me, even though I was guilty under their stupid hate speech law. The very next person they tried was a stand-up comedian who had made this mistake of putting down a couple of lesbian hecklers. And so the lesbian hecklers, this is the sort of thing Don Rickles would do, but Don Rickles couldn't do it now because he was putting down the lesbian hecklers in a homophobic way. So he was convicted of that. And I said, well, thank God for the First Amendment, because you're not going to get that nuttiness in America. No, what you have instead is a left policing itself. So they don't actually dare to make any jokes. Now, you can't make jokes about Caitlyn Jenner. You can't make jokes about the Tunisian anal examination inspector. People would think that was, in the end, only uptight, straight, white Republican men can be made jokes about. And that's why, even when you've got comedy gold like Trump is a pretty funny guy. I was talking about him last hour. I think it's pretty funny when a guy plays the theme from Phantom of the Opera before he does a campaign appearance. I think that's actually pretty funny. I think Trump's language is funny. But when you actually can't say anything about that, all you can do is congratulate yourself on holding the right attitude. When I went to see Trump in Burlington, Vermont, there was a guy handing out free tickets to Trump Improv Night at the Burlington Comedy Club. And if you've ever been to the Burlington Comedy Club, you'll know that it's no laughing matter. And my kids said to me, this guy was a pleasant guy, dweeby little wispy-bearded guy with a nice Vermont man bun. He seemed a perfectly pleasant fellow. He was handing out the Trump Improv cards, the free tickets, and we took them just to be nice to him. But my kids got it. They said, Trump is going to be funnier than any of the jokes about Trump, which is true. And that was what was so pathetic about the Emmys the other night, and it is why it's actually not a small thing when people become too craven for comedy, which is the point that Mel Brooks and John Cleese are making. When you're scared to make jokes, because that actually was a feature of life behind the Iron Curtain. When you're scared to make jokes, when they're policing jokes, you're going nowhere good. Mark Stein for Rush will take your calls straight ahead. Open Line Friday, Mark Stein for Rush. Let us go to Julie in Temecula, California. How do you say that, Julie? How do you?
You said it perfectly, Temecula.
Really? Oh, I sound like I'm Californian born and bred. It's fantastic, that.
And I love hearing you whenever you're on any of the shows. I'm always on board. So is my husband. I always set the DVR record button when I see you there, so you can watch it too.
Oh, that's very very sweet of you. What's on your mind today, Julie?
Okay, a couple things. Hopefully, I'll try and make it quick. But I am really pondering why President Trump is supporting and rallying for Luther Strange, for Alabama senator, and he's got the strong backing from McConnell, the establishment. They're spending millions of dollars on the campaign, and I just heard some liberal on Fox saying the Republican Party needs to distance itself from Moore. And Moore's been completely supporting Trump's agenda, which is the people who voted for them, their agenda. And he's also getting strong anti-establishment support from conservatives like Mike Huckabee, Sebastian Gorka, and Coulter, Sarah Palin, Steve Bannon, Breitbart. So many, I can't even name them all.
Yeah.
So what's going on here?
Well, I think the support that that Roy Moore is getting is because he sounds like Trump did during the campaign. That's the point that Sarah Palin made, that if you like Trump campaigning, this is the guy who sounds like Trump. And you mentioned some of the people who are supporting him, like Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon. Again, they were part of the Trump campaign. And there are people who would like Trump to be like he was on the campaign trail, rather than now he is when he's all house-trained and surrounded by John Kelly and H.R. McMaster. And
he's getting misguided, I think.
Well, the point is that a lot of the people like Bannon and like Gorka, who were very close ideologically to Trump, have now been removed from the White House, and Trump is surrounded by different kinds of people. Now,
that had to be, and Ann Coulter and Sarah Palin. What about them?
That's right. Now, to get back to the Luther Strange thing. I think in a sense he's being prevailed upon to do that. That generally speaking, the point of he wants the Senate to cooperate with him, so he wants to get on with McConnell. And so this guy is McConnell's guy, and so he thinks if he helps drag McConnell's guy across the finish line, McConnell might be a less incompetent boob than he's been for the last 8 months, including whatever disaster is about to befall the latest Obama repeal bill, where apparently with every passing hour the chances of it passing actually diminish. So it's another strike for McConnell. In fact, it is 3 strikes. It's 3 strikes for McConnell on Obamacare, but he's never out. So that's one argument why you should back Luther Strange, because he's kind of the incumbent, but he was just appointed to finish the term. He wasn't elected to it. And on the other hand, there's Moore, who actually came first in that primary, and so in that sense has the support of more Republican primary voters. And probably what a president should do is actually sit this one out and leave it to the voters to figure out which of these guys they want. But it's interesting to me that Trump is doubling down on Luther Strange. And what is worrying to me, and in this sense I agree with Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon and Sarah Palin and all the rest of it, is Trump was elected on a very particular platform. You saw Luther Strange has suddenly come out much more bullish and hawkish on immigration. That's because that's the core bedrock issue. And if Roy Moore effectively snaffles away the build the wall and get Mexico to pay for it part of Trump's base, then Luther Strange is in serious trouble. But I think this is Trump, in fact, being poorly advised and still thinking that McConnell is going to come through for him, as opposed to just let him down one more time in the Mitch McConnell way, Julie. So that's my take on that. Thank you for your call. We have to take a break, but we have lots more straight ahead. Open Line Friday on the Rush Limbaugh Show. Mark Stein in for Rush. I wonder, before I forget this, because I mentioned this to Mr. Snerdley before the show, this talk about how Puerto Rico is going to be out of power for months. They've got above-the-ground electric lines. Can someone explain to me why we're told to build our houses to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, but the electric poles are on pieces of wood running along the road? So that even if your house withstands the Category 5 hurricane, you're going to be out of power for weeks, if you're lucky, and for months if you're not. And I'll tell this because people are anti-French. I was on the French colony of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, which are 3 barren rocks off the coast of Newfoundland. They have their electric lines underground because they're tiny little islands in a big ocean, and when the wind blows up, there's nothing to break it up. Sometimes the French are not the idiots they're made out to be. America has the most overground power lines of any country in the developed world. And when you then have incompetent and corrupt governments, as in Puerto Rico, it means that when the hurricane blows in, you're totaled. What's the point of building your house to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, but then having above-the-ground electric poles? That's just a thought. That's my thought on Puerto Rico. Lots more on the Rush Limbaugh Show still ahead. John McCain and Lindsey Graham, as you've always wanted to see them. Not anymore. No more s'mores and back rubs for John and Lindsey. They're on the outs. John McCain has just driven a stake through Lindsey Graham's healthcare bill. He says he cannot, in good conscience, support it unless it's scored by the CBO. You know, pull whatever number you want out of the Tunisian guy's butt, and it'll make just as good sense. This is all. Do you know this guy, Senator Cassidy? He was the one. He's now being attacked by Jimmy Kimmel, who is the great last word on American healthcare. Because he said that he designed a bill that had to pass the Jimmy Kimmel test. It had to pass the Jimmy Kimmel test, the Jimmy Kimmel test, the Jimmy Kimmel test. And this is a classic lesson for Republicans when you try to pander, when you try to meet people halfway, when you try to meet them more than halfway. Cindy Sheehan, who the New York Times said had absolute moral authority when it came to anything to do with the Iraq war. In fairness to Cindy Sheehan, she was just somebody living at 27B Elm Street, and nobody knew who she was until the New York Times decided she was had full moral authority to pronounce on the Iraq war. That's one thing, you know, just somebody living over there in some residential cul-de-sac on the far side of town. Whoop, absolute moral authority. Senator Cassidy made a Hollywood celebrity the absolute moral authority on American health care. A Hollywood liberal celebrity, the absolute moral authority on American health care. How was that ever likely to work out for Senator Cassidy and Senator Graham and the Republican Party? And now John McCain has said it's over. I cannot in good conscience vote for the Graham-Cassidy proposal. And Susan Collins in Maine has said that she's leaning against it. She's leaning against it. If you're Hurricane Maria sweeping up the East Coast between Bermuda and the mid-Atlantic states, and you run up into something as you head north, that is Susan Collins leaning against it off the Maine coast out into the Atlantic. That is how far she is leaning against it. So there we go. That's Mitch McConnell. That's 3 healthcare bills that he struck out on. This guy is incredible. This is fantastic. As you know, he wrote this book, The Long Game, which is an incredible book. You really want to get this book. Once you put it down, it's impossible to pick it up again. It's a fantastic book. Did I get that the right way around? Anyway, this brilliant Mitch McConnell book, The Long Game. The Long Game. On page 737 of his book, The Long Game, Mitch McConnell tells you how many failed Obamacare repeal bills he's going to put through the U.S. Senate before we get to the one that works. I think he's still got another 28 or 29 of them to go. But John McCain has just driven a stake through that bill. That's John McCain doing his thing. He's great. He's great Maverick. He's the great Maverick guy. He's Mr. Maverick. And when you see him in Return to Saddle-Sore Canyon, I love it. It's like when you watch High Noon, and he's walking down the dusty Main Street, the old gunslinger, and he sees the bad guy up ahead, and he always just manages. He's the quickest draw in the West. Nobody is quicker than John McCain at just pulling his 6-shooters out from his side and blowing holes in the heads of his allies all around him. He's brilliant at that, John McCain. Never mind, we shall try to get beyond the John McCain. John McCain is now, I can't get over that. John McCain has just shot up Lindsey Graham. They were best. Lindsey Graham was there for him on everything for years and years and years, and now it's over. and they're on the outs together. Never return to Saddlesaw Canyon again. It's Lindsey Graham is on the trail of the Lonesome Pine from now on. Anyway, it is the end of the week, and you know what that means.
Live from New York City, it's Open Line Friday!
Yes, from Monday to Thursday, this show is a well-oiled machine under the ruthless control of a man who will brook no dissent. But on Fridays, it's like Mitch McConnell's Senate. We can't do a thing. It's complete chaos. You can derail any coherent narrative through line to the show and raise any subject you want. That's the way we do it. That's the way we do it on Open Line Friday. 1-800-282-2882. So if you want to play the old maverick gunslinger like John McCain and come and shoot up your best pal, you can do that right here on this show. Bring up any subject you want to bring up. 1-800-282-2882. I mentioned earlier, I always like these small stories that don't seem terribly important in and of themselves, but are revealing of where we're headed. Like Richard Simmons suing because he's on the front page of the magazine saying he's transitioning to a woman, and that he's had breast hormone surgery to grow breasts, and so he sues, and the judge tosses the case on the grounds that there's nothing defamatory about being told you're transitioning into a woman. On the other hand, it's a great compliment. You should be pleased. You should be pleased. And this will, if he's now said he's going to appeal, and as I said, if it gets to the Supreme Court, you can bet Judge Anthony Kennedy, who is the most important guy of all 320 million Americans, he decides everything that matters in the country. You can bet that Judge Anthony Kennedy will say, yeah, you need to lighten up, man. It's a great thing to be told you're transitioning into a woman. I'm doing it myself. I'd like to be Antonia Kennedy. When I look at some of the lady justices on the Supreme Court, mentioning no names, you can't tell me they weren't guys 20 years ago. That's how Antonia Kennedy is going to rule on that. A Swedish music festival announced that it was going to go man-free, that it was dangerous to have men at the music festival. And I was in Sweden this time last year, Sweden in summer, and I actually spoke to some girls at a music festival, 2 music festivals in Sweden, because there were problems with men. There were problems with refugee men. Men of a certain persuasion who were sexually assaulting all these girls. But you can't say that. You can't say it's the refugee guys who have wrecked these music festivals. So they've had to ban all men. And so they're now having this woman-only music festival and saying that men can't go to the music festivals until they've, quote, learned to behave. And now the woman who instituted this policy is being attacked because it's transphobic, because it discriminates. It exempts. Just see if you can follow this, because this is how strange the world is now. She didn't want to be transphobic, so she said that only cisgendered men, that's men who are born male, but that are banned from the festival, but that trans men, that is women, that's like Chaz Bono. That's like women who think they would rather live as men. So that's like Chaz Bono. So she didn't want to be transphobic, so she only banned the cisgendered men. That's the people who are born male. And she exempted the trans men from the ban on men. And the trans men have now objected on the grounds that it's grossly transphobic to say they're less male than the male rapists. Right? That's the world we live in now. Chaz Bono, the last time I checked, did not have male genitalia. So Chaz Bono has great difficulty raping any Swedish girls at a Swedish musical festival. But even if you don't have a penis, it's outrageously transphobic to suggest you can't rape as effectively as cisgendered men. That is the head-exploding rationale that is driving this. And what do all these things have in common? We are heading to an unmanned world. As I always say, it's all about diminishing men, diminishing manhood, diminishing manliness, and actually affecting a massive transfer, literally in the case of all this transgenderizing, a massive transfer from the male sector over to the female sector. But now, at any rate, Swedish trans men are threatening to sue because they resent being told that they're not as violent, misogynistic, and rapey as cisgendered men. That's the world we live in. Mark Stein for Rush. We'll take your calls straight ahead. Mark Stein for Rush. Jimmy Kimmel has now thanked John McCain for being the deciding no vote on the GOP health bill. What was it he actually tweeted? Thank you for being a hero again. Thank you, John McCain, for being a hero again and again and again. So it's Lindsey Graham and John McCain aren't in Return to Saddle-Sore Canyon anymore. They're going to remake it with John McCain and Jimmy Kimmel. And Jimmy Kimmel's going to be there around the campfire singing, "Did you ever know that you're my hero?" That's what it's come to. They've killed John McCain. Maverick has done it again. This time he's put a bullet straight through Lindsey Graham. It's incredible. Let's go to Larry in the Chicago area, Chicagoland, somewhere in the Cook County area. Larry, you're live on America's #1 radio show. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for taking my call. This is not a particularly critical political issue, but since it's Open Line Friday, I wanted to talk about something that I think is still quite important. And you being a Canadian citizen are going to be more familiar with it than most Americans. I'd like your thoughts on the Canadian transition to the metric system. Maybe you can talk about to what extent it is not complete, and any suggestions you might have for the United States.
Well, it is totally complete, and Pierre Trudeau did it within 10 minutes. And it's one of those things that, Canadians often define themselves because they share the continent with the United States. So what matters is what differentiates you from the United States. America's a republic. Canada's a monarchy. America doesn't have socialized health care. Canada does have socialized. Oh, wait a minute. That one doesn't apply anymore. And the metric system is part of that too. And Pierre Trudeau introduced it in about 10 minutes. And the only bit I would say, it's actually caught on quite a bit. I would say the only bit where people still use imperial measures is if somebody holds up a convenience store and the police come by and say, well, what was he like? And they go, well, he was a guy of about 200 pounds with brown hair, 6'1". And that's actually when they essentially revert to their pre-metric stance when they're describing the guy who held up the convenience store. Otherwise, it starts the minute you cross the border. If you, I don't know what it's like in your part of the world, but if you cross the New Hampshire-Quebec border, the first sign you see is the Quebec government sign saying "Signalisation métrique." So they tell you it's metrics signaling, and you go a couple of 100 yards further on beyond that, and there's an old people's home, and it says, old people crossing, slow down to 100. And you think, well, it's the least I could do, give the little beggars a chance or whatever it is. But that's actually fully metric now. And the point about this, Larry, are you in favor of the metric system, Larry?
Oh, absolutely. I've been at it for years and years and years.
Wow!
So disgusted it's taking so long to get it done.
Rush. It's a good thing Rush isn't here, because he is going to say, wow, because there's nothing more American than not being metric. And why do you like it, Larry? Tell me why you like it.
One thing, because it's a system. This American measurement, it's not a system. It's confusing. It wastes time. It wastes money.
Well,
it's absolutely essential that we adapt to what everybody else in the world's already done.
Well, I'll tell you what, Larry, because I'm up against a break, but we should explore this. This really demands a full-scale explanation from Rush. Those units, inches, feet, yards, pounds, they were designed to be human units to approximate to the uses you made of stuff around your life. The French invented a system, a decimal system. Everything's divided up into by tens and hundreds. that does not approximate. And that's the point. That's why in the convenience store, when some guy comes in and holds it up, everyone's in Montreal or Toronto suddenly say, oh yeah, he's about 6'1", 200 pounds, because they're the human units. The human units. Yes, Rush is back Monday. Mark Stein, honoured to be joined by one of the most incisive and hardest working journalists in the United States, the host of the Sunday show Full Measure, best-selling author Sharyl Attkisson. Sharyl, it's great to have you with us on the show. You wrote a piece the other day about the latest revelations regarding the so-called Russia investigation. And you say we're actually missing the bigger picture here, because the big picture here is the Obama administration using the intelligence agencies to surveil at least a half a dozen Trump associates and probably more.
That we know of so far. Right. I mean, if you step back and get away from the minutia, which I think some in the media focus on when it's convenient to them, and then focus on making stereotypes and generalities when it's convenient for them or their narrative. But in this case, I think if you step back and look at patterns, I'm more concerned about the idea that there was an administration. I'm not saying it's the first, but we certainly have a lot of information that seems to have escalated under the Obama administration to surveil a lot of private citizens, and I guess coincidentally, they would argue, a lot of political figures on one side of the fence only, right. People affiliated in this case with Donald Trump, as well as journalists like myself.
Well, as you say, you've actually been on the receiving end of this kind of surveillance. But you worked for the epitome of mainstream media in this country for many years. You worked for CBS News, the Tiffany Network, absolutely mainstream. What is odd to me about this is the way journalists go straight to, you know, whatever Paul Manafort may have been doing that may or may not have been suspicious, and seem to accept without reservation the idea that the government should use what you call weaponized intelligence agencies for domestic spying purposes. They don't seem bothered by that.
Many don't. I mean, some privately are. I communicate with some of my colleagues who reach out to me and are very interested in what's going on and sympathetic to it. But by and large, I think one reaction you hear a lot is, well, they had a warrant in the case of Manafort, and it doesn't seem to cross their mind that when you look at the pattern, was there a reason or a pretext for issuing these warrants, or at least justifying them? I had written an article about some intel folks under Obama who told me that political figures have figured out how to sort of reverse engineer when they want to surveil someone they can't get a warrant on, how to get warrants on or surveil people around them so that they can capture incidentally the true targets.
Right.
If that's true, and it makes sense to me, it certainly is worth asking the question whether that may have been the case in this circumstance, and I don't hear many people asking that question.
Now, when you use that phrase, reverse engineer, what you mean is that there are nominally broad powers that make it easy to get surveillance on non-U.S. persons, foreigners, all foreigners, 6.5 billion foreigners, if you want to, and that you can then use that with someone like Paul Manafort. If he's meeting with foreigners, you can use that as a justification to surveil Paul Manafort and this guy over here and this guy over there. And you do that half a dozen times, and you've basically got a nice little circuit of everybody that Donald Trump is on the telephone to. That's basically what you mean by reverse engineer.
That's what the intelligence officials that I spoke to said, that a political figure may identify a true target and then look for ways to get to that person by people around them that they can get wiretaps on. Or, this was reported in the last few months, kind of went under the radar, the intel community in 2011 expanded its official secretly so that not only could they listen to foreign people quite easily, but even U.S. citizens who simply mentioned the name of a target. So theoretically, I guess, if you or I wrote about or mentioned Muammar Gaddafi, right, we would be then subject to a warrantless ability to look into and surveil us. So Looking at it that way, it would be quite easy to reverse engineer surveillance on practically anybody that you want to listen to.
Just to underline what you said about that, you're saying that if somebody, say, does 6 blog posts about a particular foreign leader, it doesn't matter whether it's Assad or Robert Mugabe or whoever it is, that in itself legally entitles the United States government to get a warrant to surveil that guy. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure they even need a warrant, and I don't know how this was used in practice. I can only tell you that there are documents coming from the secretive court that use the phrase a single discrete communication, a single mention of a target's name by a U.S. citizen could subject them to the kind of surveillance we're talking about.
So that's absolutely that basically means anyone who mentions a foreigner could, in theory, be surveilled legally by the United States government. Is that correct?
A foreigner, if that foreigner is a legitimate target of something that the U.S. government is looking at.
Okay. So
and again, it's my impression that they were dialed back. Once this became examined and put into practice, that they promised to dial some of that back. But what I'm saying is we have learned through some documents in the past 6 months to 1 year the extent to which the intelligence community granted itself broader powers than anybody ever knew. Right. And we also know, as I mentioned in the article, that the intelligence community was criticized by the secret FISA court last fall, it was, I believe, in some documents that were made public, for having not followed its own rules to protect identities and the rules that were set up so that abuses wouldn't happen.
Right.
So when people simply trust that and some of my sources are in the intelligence community, they have great people and honest people in there. But the idea that all of them are following all of their own rules, so therefore, if there was a warrant, there was justification and there's no reason to worry about it, I think people, again, are missing the big point.
Well, you said you had no doubt that other administrations had done things in the past, but this is, for a start, 70 years ago, they didn't have agencies like this. We live in a country now that has proliferating octopus limbs of intelligence agencies, some of whom don't even know what the other ones are doing. That's new. And secondly, we live in an age of great technological advance, so it's not a question of having to rappel down the wall of the apartment house and actually install a physical wire. So we have things where it's much more technologically easy, and we have intelligence agencies with huge unlimited budgets. My sense of what's happening is that the Obama administration was using the cover of national security to eavesdrop on a lot of people who were essentially nothing to do with national security, but they regarded as domestic opponents. Is that fair?
And I think it is a fair question to ask, and I think this was happening if you look at reports in other countries, and not to give the Obama administration a pass by any stretch, but I think there's just a general march in our intelligence communities toward this sort of behavior by some, regardless of who's in charge, and they stay there from administration to administration. So I think if you look at the patterns, it continues to get worse no matter who's in charge.
You say in your column, nobody wants our intel agencies to be used like the Stasi in East Germany, and everybody knows if you were in those Warsaw Pact countries after the wall came down, people had been terrified of internal surveillance, the idea that your next door neighbor is snooping on you, or even your children are snooping on you. Do your mainstream media colleagues, like your old pals at CBS, have they told you they think that's overheated, the Stasi comparison, or do they think at heart is it actually justified by what's going on?
Well, and if you don't mind, I'll make this my last comment because I'm working on our program for Sunday and have to run.
Right.
But, and I appreciate you having me on, I have heard from a few people only since I wrote that column in a supportive sense, colleagues in journalism who think this is a really important thing to talk about. So certainly not all of them think this is overblown or something that's exaggerated in any sense.
Okay, well, you keep on that, Cheryl. Go off and do the Sunday show now. That's Full Measure, by the way. You can see that on some of your Sinclair television stations this Sunday with Cheryl Atkinson. But she's actually still trying to get the truth about what the Obama administration did to her when they hacked into her computer. And that is actually a chilling line from Cheryl's column. Nobody wants our intel agencies to be used like the Stasi in East Germany. It's not an overheated comparison. This is not a story of foreign interference in the United States electoral process. It is the story of domestic interference by the ruling party against its political opponents. It's deeply disturbing, and Cheryl's phrase that they essentially reverse engineered it. Someone high up in the Obama administration, and you got to bet it goes to the top, decided they wanted, when Trump, an unconventional candidate, started running, and they knew nothing about him. It wasn't like Jeb Bush, wasn't like Rubio, wasn't like any of those guys. And to get the goods on him, they selected people around him who had dealings with foreigners, and that gave them the pretext to reverse engineer it, as Cheryl put it, and thereby, it's basically the Hillary email explanation. Hillary said she didn't need to keep her emails because the people who she sent them to had kept their copies of them. Likewise, the government didn't need to tap Trump's phone because they were tapping all the people that he was calling. That's how they reverse engineered it. Mark Stein in for Rush. Lots more still to come. Nikki Haley says she doesn't want to be Secretary of State. But not because she's Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, and everyone likes what she's doing there. And they're saying now, I don't really know. I don't want to be Secretary of State. I don't quite get the Nikki Haley thing. I mean, she seems a perfectly pleasant person, but she was responsible for that insane moment when we had the State of the Union. Remember Obama's last State of the Union? Obama spends his last State of the Union attacking Trump, and then you have always this Republican response, which is usually Dullsville, Snoozeville, big snore, unless Marco Rubio has to have a glass of water, and then it's the most exciting thing. Then it's like Avatar. They think, wow, did they just CGI that plastic bottle of water in? Wow, that's incredible. Except the only time it hasn't been a total snoozeroo was whatever it was last year, when Obama spends the State of the Union attacking Trump, and then the official Republican response to the State of the Union by Nikki Haley just attacks Trump. And she got appointed to his cabinet on that basis. And now they're talking about, I don't think Nikki Haley is quite on board with the Trump view of the world. And if you take some advice from me, Mr. President, I know you don't have Sebastian Gorka, Steve Bannon, those guys. I'd be a little wary about making Nikki Haley Secretary of State. I just want to say one thing before we wrap it up today, because Rush has been at a family funeral. And I saw Rush at a funeral, and he gave the eulogy for Kit Carson, who worked on this show for decades, and it was a very moving performance, and he did it very touchingly and very tenderly. And I said to Rush, have you ever given, it was wonderful that you must do a lot of these. And he said, no, he never did. This was the first funeral eulogy he'd ever done. And actually that was because Kit no doubt turned down most of them. Kit was responsible for saying no to people who wanted Rush to do things. And so Rush is at this family funeral today. I don't know whether Rush is speaking at it, but if he does, you can bet that he will be talking about the person they are there to remember. If you want to see what an absolutely insane funeral eulogy looks like, look at Maxine Waters' eulogy for Dick Gregory. And if you're wondering who Dick Gregory is, don't bother. Maxine couldn't care less. He's just some guy lying in the wooden box at the front of the church, while Maxine Waters is raving about impeach 45, impeach 45. We're going to clean out the White House. Now, People drive around with these, when you're in a car accident and they open up your wallet and you've got a little organ donor card that says, in the event of a car accident, I want to donate my organs to people. I'm going to have a card that says, in the event that I am fatally injured in a car crash, I do not want Maxine Waters giving my eulogy. No one in the church will even know your name. All she did at Dick Gregory's funeral is talk about Trump. That's great. That's great. Maybe when Trump kicks the bucket, she'll actually deliver at his funeral the eulogy she should have delivered for Dick Gregory. I don't get this, but I can tell you something. There's something deeply dehumanizing and insane about a world that is so political that your so-called friend is dead and in the ground, and you cannot say anything at his eulogy except impeach 45, impeach 45, impeach. They did it to Senator, what was his name, Paul Whitehouse in Minnesota. Paul Wellstone in Minnesota, 2002, and they turned that in just to a shout fest. The ability to know how to hold a funeral is about as basic to human dignity as you can get. And Maxine Waters, as I said, whatever Rush is saying or not saying at this funeral today, he won't be doing that ridiculous impeach 45 routine. Mark Stein for Rush. We'll close it out in a moment. Mark Stein in for Rush. Rush had some family business to attend to. He will be back Monday. I always get a kick being here with Mr. Snerdley and the gang. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be in Minneapolis on October the 2nd. Always love my appearances there with the Center of the American Experiment at the Guthrie Theatre, which is a beautiful theatre. And if you go to steinonline.com, that's S-T-E-Y, as in, why do I have to listen to some lousy foreigner telling me everything that's wrong with the country? Steinonline.com, you can find out how to get tickets for that. But this has been a jam-packed day, from Tunisian anal inspectors to Obama surveillance, which are basically the same thing. Rush back Monday.